Good afternoon. I'm Blaise Mishtal, JINSA's Vice President for Policy. JINSA, of course, has been following the Israel-Iran conflict that has been unfolding over the last 5 days very closely. I hope that you've been able to catch some of our previous webinars with JINSA's Israeli military fellows assessing the war from Israel's point of view. We had those webinars yesterday, Monday, and on Friday. You can find those on our website, jinsa.org, along with daily updates about the war and other terrific analysis from our staff. Today, however, we're honored to be joined by three of JINSA's Generals and Admirals Program alumni with deep expertise in the Middle East to offer the view from the U.S. military perspective of the conflict as it's unfolding and what might happen next. I'm delighted to be joined by Vice Admiral Kevin Donegan, former commander of the Fifth Fleet, as well as the J3 Director of Operations for U.S. Central Command. Lieutenant General Joseph Guastella, the former AFCENT, the Air Force Commander for Central Command, and Lieutenant General Charlie Moore, the former Deputy Director of U.S. Cyber Command and an F-16 pilot with thousands of hours in the cockpit. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Admiral Donegan, maybe I could start with you. As the J3, as the Director of Operations for CENTCOM, you surely studied the Iranian challenge, the potential for having to take military action against Iran's military program. Is this Israeli military operation that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 days in line with what you would have expected? Has it surprised you in any way?
Hey, well, thanks, Blaise. Thanks for letting me join the JINSA group for today. It's always a pleasure to join JINSA for events like this, and it's a pleasure to also be with the other panelists. So, thanks. Well, I think I've been pretty clear about this in other forums that my assessment of the Israelis' effectiveness in these, and you have to look at this from the standpoint of, we're less than a week into this, what they've been doing. You're just over a week, half of a week into this. So when you look at what's been accomplished in that amount of time, I don't think you'll find anyone that can't be isn't impressed with the overall effectiveness that the Israelis have had in 3 areas. And in my mind, number one is, they went directly very early against IRGC and Quds Force leadership. And when you look at that, what they were able to achieve in terms of removing key leadership across the spectrum of that force, which is, we all know, is the primary generators of bad things that happen in the region, they were tremendously successful. And what that does to a military, and Gus and Charlie Moore can tell you this, when you remove that numbers of key leaders, it's going to make it hard and difficult for Iran to just have command and control and respond afterwards. So that was singularly impressive. And so, in essence, they weakened the main fighting force of the Iranians in just a few days. The second thing is that's then weakened their military overall. Yeah, there's other elements of the military, but the Quds Force and the IRGC is their bread and butter, and it is where their senior leaders that have the most influence in terms of how to carry out any actions or response it have been weakened. And in essence, that's also weakened the regime. Then the other thing you've seen the Israelis do, which I think is equally impressive, is they knew that there would be retaliatory attacks against Israel. And as a result, they have targeted and focused on the things that can reach out and touch Israel in their target base, and that is the ballistic missile capability, drone capability, but not just from the standpoint of what they can launch, but to reconstitute it, the manufacturing, the other capabilities that get after it. And that's been impressive. Just the other day, there was an estimate that the Israelis were able to successfully eliminate about a third of the launchers of ballistic missiles that the Iranians have. And you'd have to argue that they're also Uh, that's just the beginning. They didn't stop. That wasn't a one-time thing, right? They know that the Iranians can reach out and touch them, and they don't want to leave it to just their defense forces to get at it. And I didn't even touch on their success in the nuclear side. And I'll close with this. There's been some criticism that maybe they haven't gone after all of the nuclear sites yet. But at the same time, these other things were important for them to do in the sequence that they're doing. Getting after other nuclear sites, they will continue to do as this thing progresses. And I think the focus rightly will be on eliminating the threats that can reach out and touch that can continue to touch Israel, and at the same time do what they wanted to do. And the final thought before I turn it over to the other panelists is the Israelis are going to be persistent about this. They won't stop in my mind until they've gotten all the targets that that were on their original list, plus the things that they're learning about because they've stimulated this Iranian network, and it's not static. In other words, you learn about other things you didn't know when you hear different communications, and the way that the Israelis have woven a tremendously deep intelligence apparatus into this has been critical to their success. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Admiral. General Guastella, let me turn to you. Admiral Donegan mentioned the sort of the sequencing of targets that Israel has been hitting, and maybe to us non-military experts, it was interesting that this is a strike against their nuclear program, but they haven't necessarily been hitting the nuclear program first and hardest. They've been going after these other sets of targets. And one of those has definitely been Iran's air defense and air capabilities. And I think it was just the other day that Israel announced that it now has complete air superiority over Iran in just a matter of days. Is that surprising to you that they could do that so quickly, that there wasn't more of a fight, more of an ability to defend itself on the part of the Iranians?
Oh, that's a great question, and I just want to pile on also to what the Admiral said. Thanks to JINSA and Blaze, thanks to you for this opportunity, and great supporter of your organization. It has been astonishing what Israel Air Force has been able to do. I mean, I was amazed at the success that they've had, but not just with this campaign. The success they had several months ago when they did the counter to one of the ballistic missile attacks against Israel proper. That strike that they did a while back really set back their air and missile defenses to the point where it opened the door for what they're doing right now. And unlike the Ukraine fight, where the whole idea of air superiority which is foundational to a campaign, but had never been achieved by the Russians or the Ukrainians. Israel's doing it by the book. And by the way, at the distances that they're doing at, it's a lot. Those are not insignificant. To fly these missions out of Israel, across other countries, which are allowing them, by the way, and then being so effective in dismantling that air defenses is nothing short of astonishing. And I'm very, very impressed with the training and the professionalism of the Israeli Air Force to prosecute the campaign. But as was said before, the sequence of things that you've seen hit, first and foremost, the decapitation of the decision makers. That's right out of the book. We did a lot of that during the Iraqi campaigns, to take out the decision makers and create paralysis in the fielded forces. And then concurrently with that, though, finishing off the air and missile defenses that they have. So that, as you said before, they were able to announce they have air superiority over Tehran. I mean, to have air superiority over someone's capital, amazing. And it's a testimony to the professionalism of the Israeli Air Force. And then lastly, concurrently with those two areas of targeting, which is the high value individuals as well as the air and missile defenses, you see them prosecuting the counter nuclear piece and going after the nuclear stuff, and also the what we call power projection capabilities, which is the launchers, the conventional ballistic missiles that are being shot at Israel. Those are not insignificant in terms of difficulty of taking those out, because a lot of those are mobile, and mobile launchers are hard to find. They're hard to chase down, and you have to sometimes hit things on the move, which require it's very difficult. And so, but they've done it by the book. They've taken down the air defenses, which allows them to fly with impunity over the country of Iran. compliant, I would say, for the most part. And that impunity then allows them to really prosecute those other targets, such as the power projection capability and the nuclear piece. The nuclear piece is definitely something that's very, very involved. There's more than just surface targets there that need to be struck. That if you really want to get after the whole of it, and we're seeing that unfold right now.
I know all three of you are aviators, General Guastella. I'll ask you this, but welcome any of you to chime in. You know, it's on a daily basis, the U.S. Air Force and Navy conduct aerial operations far beyond the borders of the United States. But I think for most air forces, that is not a common occurrence. Can you give us an insight into the logistical and sustainment challenges and what it means for the pilots to be flying these missions that are 1,000 miles outside of Israel and conducting operations so far away from Israeli bases?
No, you're absolutely right. And I know Charlie is a veteran of many long distance missions himself, and it is really impressive. Well, I jokingly say sometimes when I'm talking to countries, the difference between a good Air Force and a great Air Force is not necessarily just the fighters; it's the tankers, right? Your ability to refuel your jets and take the fight to the enemy, going the long distances, and then also staying out there for extended periods of time, and that requires air refueling, and that's certainly something Israel is taking the advantage of, and so it's nothing short of a miracle what they've done in terms of dismantling the air and missile defense. But I will say that's a huge testament also to the fifth generation aircraft that they're using, which provide them a tremendous advantage over traditional air defenses. Unless they're not invisible, but they're very hard to see, and that opens the door for traditional other aircraft, fourth and fifth gen. And the other piece to this is that, there's two ways of striking targets. You can shoot missiles in there, right, which are very expensive, and you don't have to enter into the air and missile defenses. Or you can fly in, but once you've taken the missiles, the air defense down, if you will, then gravity bombs start to become a player, which are much more numerous, much less expensive, and you can really prosecute targets at a much higher rate, which you've done by taking the air and missile defense out. Basically, it allows your F-16s, the fourth gen, the F-15s that the Israeli Air Force have, all that fourth gen force to get in there and prosecute targets because you've taken the air defenses down with the fifth gen assets.
The fifth gen being the F-35.
That's right.
General Moore, let me turn to you. I mean, eager to get your perspective as an aviator, but also wanted to ask you with your cybercom hat. One of the first operations, military operations, intelligence operations to address Iran's nuclear program was a cyber operation. It was Stuxnet. And yet we haven't really been hearing that much until maybe just today about the cyber dimension of this conflict. Is that because there isn't one? Is it just sort of playing out under the table? What can you tell us about what might be going on in cyberspace?
Hey, Blaze, thanks for the questions. And again, appreciate, like the other panelists, being here today and being able to interact with everybody. Let me go back. I'll answer that question. I'll go back and just pile on to what General Guastella just said. That is the differentiator. I mean, air forces that can project power and not just be one and done, but sustain it over time, that is a huge difference. The U.S. has been doing that, or had been doing that in Afghanistan and Iraq. Gus can tell you as the CFAC, I mean, our average missions were pretty much what we're seeing the Israelis fly today. But there are very few air forces in the world that can do that, and they're demonstrating that ability, and I think they could sustain it for a very, very long time, which is extremely impressive. To your question about cyber, obviously, one of the issues with cyber is that a lot of it is very clandestine. Some of it is covert for obvious reasons. You don't always want adversaries to know what you're doing or how you're doing it. You don't want them to look for you in certain locations. And when you deploy certain tools and cyber weapons, they tend to be something that's one and done. So for that reason alone, most of the stuff won't be nearly as overt as we see with the air operations that are being conducted and reported on in a daily manner. However, I will say, I mean, one of the things that surprised me, again, to agree with both Kevin and Gus, it's the speed with which they achieved air superiority. I have no doubt that it wasn't just the stealth and electronic warfare and the kinetic operations that they conducted against those things. I'll bet you that there was a cyber component as well because of the systemic um, approach and obviously outcomes that they've been able to achieve so rapidly. We may never know that for sure, but if I was a betting man, I'd say that's definitely involved. And then, Blaze, you brought up the most recent operations against SEPA Bank by Predatory Sparrow. At least that's who it's being attributed to. If you're familiar with cyber operations, this is an open source, a group that's attributed back to its relationship with Israel and the Israeli Defensive Forces. They were able to bring down SEPA Bank, pretty much deleting, at least what the reports are telling us, all of their data. SEPA Bank is not foreign to the United States. We're very aware of what they do, and obviously to the Israelis. This is the banking institution, 1,800 locations throughout Iran, and then they have locations throughout Europe as well, that really funded and was the financial center of IRGC activities, the nuclear program, their missile program, etc. And you can see the impact that it's not just having on the military operations, but all of the citizens that are rushing now to try and get their money, not just out of SEPA Bank, but out of other financial institutions inside Iran. I think it's going to have a very, very big impact on regime stability.
Thank you, General Moore.
Hey, Blaze, let me
Yeah.
add in another piece on the cyber side when you look at what General Moore was talking about. The other piece that I link together with cyber is the ability to collect intelligence. So you can use your accesses to cyber to do things, or you can use them to understand what's going on, right? And what's crystal clear to me is the ability of the Israelis to know what was going on and where people were, understand where they had to focus their targeting, etc. Was singularly impressive, because you can't take out the kind of leadership that they took out. You can't hurt the air defense systems to the level they did. You can't hit 1/3 of the ballistic missile launchers in a couple days without having a tremendous insight and other accesses that you may not necessarily be using to from the standpoint that Moore was talking about, to take offensive actions. But you're integrating that information with your operational forces to do the things that the Israelis did, and their ability to do that integration of information, and that's from cyber, from signals intelligence, from what they could observe from other imagery and such. The ability for them to weave that together was, when you asked earlier about it being impressive. So I'll flip it back to General Moore, because he lived both those worlds, and to validate that. But that's my view also, that is coupled. Not everyone likes the neat part about what cyber can do, directly, but its ability to facilitate and be essential for the rest of this military operation has been singularly impressive to me.
No, Kevin, I'll say I think you hit it right on the head, and I would never speak for our Israeli allies, but I've heard many of their senior leaders say many times they see a greater value in the intelligence aspect of the cyber domain than necessarily in the offensive operations that can be conducted. The one other thing I'll add back to the cyber discussion is that you also have to understand, we haven't heard a lot about the Iranians' cyber operations and any impacts they're having inside of Israel. Again, I doubt Israel would publicize a lot of that for obvious reasons. They're very good at not giving the adversary information that they don't want them to have. But I will bet you again that Unit 8200, very, very capable cyber operators inside Israel. And my best guess is that you probably saw a very well coordinated, along with the kinetic operations inside Iran, a very well coordinated attack against Iranian infrastructure, cyber infrastructure, that they would have used to launch some type of attack against critical infrastructure or governmental networks inside of Israel. And I bet that that's probably what's going on.
Thank you. Maybe I can turn now to the Iranian response, which has been significantly lower in terms of missiles and projectiles fired than we saw either in the April or October attack last year. And we're sort of seeing that each night the amount of missiles that Iran is able to fire seems to be diminishing. Is that surprising that they haven't been able to mount a bigger response? And do you think that they're going to be able to keep this up, or is the sort of the Israeli hunting down of the launchers going to effectively push them into running out of the ability to launch missiles? I don't know, Admiral Donegan, if you have thoughts on this.
Hey, thanks, Blaze, for the question. I'll put a plug in for a JINSA and the products that you all are able to produce over there that are pretty impressive. One of them is a product that you produced on your assessment, JINSA's assessment on ballistic missiles, how many Iran has, how many they used, how many have been struck, maybe even how many they would want to keep. It's a pretty impressive document that you have in your online, and I think it accurately, if you weed through all that data, it paints a really good picture of the fact that Iran hasn't sat still. They've launched some significant attacks in waves, in multiple waves in multiple days. The question is, how long can they go on doing that? And if you read and just track the information of what they used and what's been targeted and what continues to be targeted, that can't go on indefinitely, right? So there's a timeline and how long they can continue, and they have to either do two things. If they want to extend the timeline, they have to put less missiles in their barrages that they fire, do less barrages per day, etc.
Oh, Admiral?
Then they have to have the calculus. Do I want to go to zero? Yes.
Sorry, you cut out for a second there. Please.
Okay. Can you hear me okay now? Okay. So the only reason I mentioned that is, mention that product is because it's a really good one to give you a sense on how many missiles the Israelis, assessed that the Iranians have, but whatever that number is, there is a timeline limit for how long you can continue to send things, and the Israelis are really focused now on eliminating and degrading significantly the amount of missiles that they have left to fire and the launchers that they use to do them, at least for the ones that can touch and reach out and touch Israel. There are a whole another set of missiles, though, that can reach out and touch other areas in the Middle East. Israel just happens to be a long range, and they have less of those than their overall number of missiles.
Yeah, so I do want to touch on Iran's other options for retaliation, but just sticking with the ballistic missiles it's launching at Israel quickly. I don't know, maybe General Guastella, am I right in thinking that in order to launch a missile, the Iranians have to put it on a launcher? They're exposing themselves to Israeli aircraft in the moment of launch, and so every time they're launching a missile, they're risking the loss of the ability to launch future missiles. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, and everything Admiral said is correct as well. It's waning what they can actually generate, and it's because of how rapidly Israeli Air Force has been prosecuting those targets. You're right. When you launch, you're visible to God and country. Everyone can see you that you just launched, and it's quite possible that even if the launch occurs and successfully and the missile gets out of there, that they'll prosecute the empty launcher, the rail. And destroy it, so it can't be used subsequently. And then also chasing down where all the storage is for all these things. It sounds like that's what they're doing. And honestly, that's the nuclear stuff can wait if they're able to prosecute and hit these launchers and the storage facilities and the missiles themselves before they get off the ground. That's the best use of their air power right now. They can get after the nuke stuff later on. They're not generating nuclear weapons overnight, but those can wait. But what we can't wait is the these targets that are emerging as they shoot. But as the Admiral mentioned, no, they're going after the targets, the missiles that can strike Israel. There's a lot of things that they could do that's a lateral escalation with shorter range missiles that can't reach Israel, but can affect other things in the region. And that's something that'll have to be addressed depending on how long this campaign goes.
I don't know, General Moore, but everyone, are you surprised that Iran hasn't used those other projectiles it has available to reach other targets, to expand the conflict, to target U.S. bases and personnel or energy infrastructure in the Gulf, or any of the other more vulnerable assets closer into Iran?
I'm not really surprised. I think the Iranians definitely believe our president, President Trump, when he says if they do that it will be met with overwhelming force. I think at that point, the survival of the regime is no longer going to be in question. So I think that's exactly what they're faced with and they're dealing with. So the question is then, how do they respond? I am a bit surprised to then dovetail into what General Guastella just said, that they haven't looked at other ways to horizontally escalate without directly attacking U.S. servicemen and women or our infrastructure, our basing in the region. Looking at the Strait of Hormuz, looking at more traffic that passing through the Red Sea with their proxies, the Houthis, who have launched some attacks back towards Israel, but haven't done anything big like we saw in the last few months in the Red Sea, or activating any proxy forces that might conduct some type of terrorist actions in the region or elsewhere in the globe, especially against Israeli diplomats or even citizens.
Do you think there are conditions under which it's possible that Iran will escalate if it runs out of ballistic missiles to be ranging Israel, but it's still under Israeli attack? Is it going to be under pressure to find other ways to lash out, or does the conflict seem pretty contained as it is right now? Admiral Donegan, any opinions?
Yeah, I'll go back kind of to what I was saying earlier and then expand on that a little bit. You're describing the $60 million question, right? Is what we're seeing now as wide as this thing's going to go, and how does it end? And it's clear to me that the place that we're in now is not the place any of the leaders were in a week ago. Right. So there were decisions made and things said by leadership on all sides as this thing started off, that get reevaluated every day based on what they're seeing unfold. Right. And as an example, if U.S. forces get attacked, that's a different decision calculus than if they're not attacked. Right. And how leaders are going to act in that they're going to be completely different than how they acted before that happened. And the same thing is true on the Iranian side, right? Based on what they're seeing, and they're going to look at it through the lens of regime survival, right? And or is what energy is being attacked, right? Right now, the energy sites that we've seen being attacked by the Israelis have been on the ability of the regime to provide power and things for their population and their own war fighting, as opposed to what they export, if that makes sense. In other words, the attacks haven't been things that disrupt oil shipments that would be going to China and other places around the world. So as you see things unfold that are different from the present situation, then the leaders have to evaluate what's happening and make different decisions. And I don't think we have a crystal ball on that. And horizontal escalation, it could be the biggest wild card. The Iranians attacked U.S. from regard. I think you've seen over the last several days the U.S. posture forces in the region to ensure that the president has at his disposal the widest range of options available to him, if that makes sense, right? And your General Kurilla, that's exactly what you would say. I want to have the forces I need in the region so that I can provide the best, widest range of options. And that could include everything from going into Fordo and going deep and eliminating nuclear capability, or it could be other things destroyed that are threatening U.S. forces or that attacked U.S. forces. That makes sense. So, but those decisions, meaning that when leaders are making those decisions, you want to they're going to make sure that they have all the means to allow them to take those actions. And I think you're seeing the U.S. has postured its forces to ensure that we can, number one, protect our own forces, and two, if they are attacked, that we have the ability to respond as a country. That's from the United States side.
So I do want to get to the options available to the U.S. and your own recommendations of which of those options it should pick. But maybe as a transition question, staying with this question of the U.S. posture in the region, General Guastella, let me ask you specifically about how the U.S. is postured at Al Udeid. So I think we've seen in recent days reporting that actually U.S. assets have been leaving Al Udeid. And in the past, General McKenzie, who's a distinguished fellow here at JINSA, has written that Al Udeid would be vulnerable in a potential conflict with the Iranians. So what is the role of the Al Udeid base for the U.S. posture in the region right now, and how the U.S. thinks about potential action against the Iranians? Is it a useful asset?
Yeah, well, Al Udeid is just one of many bases that we have in the Middle East. It happens to be home of the Air Operations Center, the CAOC, the Combined Air Operations Center, which houses not just U.S. but many other countries. But the thing is, though, we've been very aware of the risks because the proximity. I call it the tyranny of how close things are. It's proximity that's the issue, and so the CENTCOM has been very aware of that. We've dispersed much wider across the region than we were several years ago, and the functionality of that Air Operations Center can be completely done from other places. So really, Al Udeid is no longer a Achilles heel of any form for the United States. I wouldn't want to leave airplanes on the ramp there. That would be vulnerable. But then again, we don't need that base as a power projection platform for prosecuting the war against Iran. But there is no war against Iran from the United States right now, and I think that's actually, when you think about it, this is unfolding incredibly well, where Israel is doing the job here for us, and the United States is not involved, and they are doing it exceptionally well. I think if Iran were to escalate horizontally and begin to target U.S. forces in the region, then they are now going at war with the United States. And that then opens up a whole new level of risk to the Iranian regime and a lot more for this, across Iran. And so I think they're right now very deterred against going. And I think it's because of the Trump administration, frankly, the strength that the administration has shown and the willingness to use forces to take out Iranian, not up until now, not on Iran proper, but what they've done to eliminate the threat from the Houthis, which were proxies for Iran, shooting into Israel, is commendable. And so the message is loud and clear. The United States is willing to get after this if they're hitting us. And so right now, all the forces that are there, I think, are well postured. There are sufficient defensive forces there to protect the U.S. service members on the ground and at sea, and it's a very credible force if this campaign were to widen.
And if I could just stay with you a moment longer, General Guastella, 2 weeks ago, we put out a report talking about how the United States and other partners came to Israel's defense during the April and October Iranian attacks on Israel, and the lessons that can be learned for building out a regional air and missile defense capability. I know that you've worked with us in the past on that topic. Can you talk a little bit about the involvement of the U.S. in helping defend Israel right now? And maybe do we know anything about whether other regional partners are involved? Is any of that cooperation that we saw in April and October being reprised currently?
Well, yes, and I mean I can't speak to all the details of what exactly the U.S. is doing, but in general terms, we are supporting with our naval assets and some of our long-range air and missile defense assets that are in the region. So yes, indeed, we are protecting them with that. But the other piece, like you mentioned before, it is allow the Gulf partners that have allowed U.S. aircraft and in some cases Israeli aircraft to operate over their land and over their borders to interdict the missiles that have been coming has been tremendous, and that is willingness years ago probably would never have been possible. But I think the Gulf partners realize, that Israel has a right to defend itself. The Gulf partners don't want what's happening to Israel. They don't want to be drug into this, and they know that the only way to defend themselves, for Israel to defend themselves, is to do so farther away from its borders than the border itself. You need to defend. Defense starts far away, and the willingness of those allies has just been tremendous, and that's a function of, I think, the leadership the United States has provided the region, and it's certainly helped Israel a great deal.
So I have one more question for each of you, and then I want to get to questions from the audience. If you do have any questions, please feel free to submit those using the Q&A function. I see that we have several in the queue already, so I'll get to those momentarily and read them out to the panelists. But if you have others, please feel free to submit them. So General Moore, let me start with you, but would be curious for everyone to respond to this. If you were in General Kurilla's shoes today, if you were leading Central Command and you were asked by the president for your recommendation for what sort of the U.S. military should be doing, what our level of involvement should be in this conflict, what would you recommend right now?
Well, I think General Kurilla has been doing a fantastic job. This goes back to April when I know he was in Israel before we had the first launch from Iran, the massive launch on Iran against Israel, helping set up the defensive posture to help defend the nation, along with our friends and allies in the region. And he's continued to do a great job in the attacks in October, and then of course up through today. I think the key thing is to continue to tell the president there can't be any daylight between the United States and Israel when it comes to defense of Israel itself. There hasn't been to this point during the current administration. I think it's extremely important that we continue to make that very clear, not just to Iran, but to everybody in the region and the world. That said, I want to go back and touch on something that I think both Kevin and Gus brought up, and that's really, really important. The center of gravity on the friendly side, on the U.S. and Israeli side right now, I think, is the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. They have a close personal relationship, a very trusting relationship. And what that's allowed us to do as allies in this circumstance is understand each other's posture and the role that we need to play. The Prime Minister sees what's going on with Iran, obviously, as an existential threat and decided they had to take action. I think on our side, President Trump realizes the exposure that the United States servicemen and women and our infrastructure in the region have. There's really no way for us to protect ourselves from an onslaught and attack like Israel's endured, not just in last April and October, but obviously in the last 5 days. We simply couldn't defend it. And because of that posture and those circumstances, we've allowed, or not allowed, but we've watched Israel take direct action. We've watched the president try to be the negotiator and try to look for ways to de-escalate and potentially bring an end to the conflict. In one way, you basically see the prime minister being the iron fist, and you see President Trump being the velvet glove. But that's been changing over time, because as time's gone on, I think it's become increasingly obvious that although the objective of these operations wasn't to bring about regime change, it was to decrease the Iranian regime's ability to produce a nuclear weapon. You heard from the prime minister early on that that might be an outcome. And so what concerns me, and what I would have, if I was General Kurilla, I would be talking to the president about, is if that continues to become increasingly more likely that the regime will fail, how do we have an orderly departure? Because if there's not an orderly departure, and that regime starts to fail in a sudden manner, that is when I think you have an extremely high risk of them taking all these actions that we've been talking about that they haven't to date. Their shorter range ballistic missiles, their cruise missiles, the remotely piloted aircraft going against the bases and infrastructure throughout the region where we have very little ability to defend ourselves. And I think that's the most dangerous time.
Thank you, General Guastella. Your recommendations for U.S. military involvement at the moment?
Well, I think General Moore said he's absolutely right. There is certainly risks for us, but I think the Israel has always taken the Iranian threat very, very seriously, and they have to with the Israeli history and everything else. And they're finally they had it, and they took this opportunity, and they're going after the nuclear weapons that Iran has or is trying to build. And so I think it's important that the U.S. stay out of it for now. However, if now that they've gone in there, if there's assistance the United States can provide to finish this off, so that indeed any nuclear ambition is going to be set back, not just a year or two, but significantly set back, and Israel can't do that themselves, then I think there would be opportunities for us to selectively assist in that, because as the president has stated, we cannot have a nuclear armed Iran. And could you imagine if the instability of the regime that we see right now included a nuclear weapon? It would be unbelievable. And so preventing that, and now that we've taken the lid off this, Israel's taken the lid off, I think there may be an opportunity here selectively for the U.S. maybe to contribute to this. So really, indeed, the chances of them developing a nuclear weapon is significantly delayed.
And Admiral Donegan, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are less aligned with the U.S.'s support militarily, and more aligned with that the U.S.'s key role in this can be driving this into the hands of Witkoff and the others who are, the negotiating arm, so to speak. And why I say that is because there's been gestures to our allies directly, it appears, from Iran to try to set conditions for the U.S. to get the Israelis to stop and drive itself to the table, drive this to the table. And then the most recent responses that you've heard come from the White House have been related towards, yeah, we could go to the table, but we're talking for, even words like unconditional surrender have been used. The point that I make is that Iran's strength early on was greater, and it seems to be diminishing as time goes on, to come to the table on terms that are amenable to them. So as it stands now, I think the U.S.'s best option here is to together be the ones that are there to have the talks directly with the Iranians at the right time to how this thing ends, right? What's the off-ramp? And I think the conditions for this off-ramp are going to be rather stark from Iran's standpoint that the U.S. would be willing to accept, meaning no enrichment of no enrichment, no R&D, and giving up the things that they've enriched already. Those are terms that the Iranians didn't want to, that were red lines for them before. And now I think that as this thing goes forward, that's where the U.S. would play, is at whatever time. And I don't know whether that'll take weeks, days, months, whatever to happen, but I think we're driving in that direction to where they're going to have to be completely different level of talks. If the Iranians are serious about talks now, they're going to have to come in a completely different way than they have before. There's not going to be any stalling allowed, if that makes any sense. And that then potentially provides a path for the Iranians that the regime does survive, right? But without nuclear weapons, which is, that last part is the win that the United States is looking for, and the Israelis. And I always would, as I've watched attempts at regime changes through the use of military force over the course of my 38 years in the military and my study of history before that, rarely does that turn out well. and certainly from the U.S.'s standpoint, we haven't been very good at it. So I don't know how that plays out in a positive way, is what I'm saying, because we wouldn't want just regime change. We want revolt, where the Iranians themselves have decided that they don't like this regime, and how you get to that is a difficult situation, right? And it's very difficult. We could talk about that for a whole nother session. But that's the way I see the U.S. playing it. And notice I didn't really talk about the military side. I thought Gus and Charlie did a great job on that.
Yeah, I think that would be the difference between regime change and regime collapse, Admiral, which is something we've written about here at JINSA in the past. Let me turn to questions that we have for all of you. This is a question directed to you, General Guastella, although maybe Admiral Donegan in your J3 hat, you might want to weigh in or not. It's from Bloomberg News' Tony Capaccio, who asks, how much contingency planning did CENTCOM perform in terms of attacking the Fordow facility? How hard a target was it assessed to be? Was there a sense as to how many MOP aim points are needed to be hit and penetrated in order to target that facility? Any comment?
Well, suffice it to say, the United States has been studying the Iranian nuclear situation for decades. And trying to understand where the facilities are, how well defended they are, how deeply buried some of them are, so that the preparation and the intelligence on that is extensive, I guess is what I should say. Although it's not infallible, I'm sure we don't know everything. Clearly, we don't know everything, but we're very aware of some of the physics involved and some of the very deeply buried locations. But I'm not at liberty to say much else about it other than that we're aware. And the Iranians are smart. They intentionally put things underground to make it hard to take out. And so, but the U.S. and Israel is aware of that. But I don't know if I would want to comment on much more about weaponeering, if you will.
Sticking with a similar theme, we have a question about the MOP, which needs the United States to carry it because only the B-52 and the B-2 can carry it. But question is, if Israel has air superiority over Iran, can't it just push a MOP off the back of a C-130 and drop it that way?
Good idea, but probably not going to work because I think they're maybe confusing the MOP and the MOAB, the mother of all bombs, which it doesn't require a lot of accuracy. That is wheeled out the back of a transport aircraft. But no, the MOP was specifically designed for these kind of situations where deep and hard and deeply buried targets. That's exactly why the thing was designed. It's designed to stay intact on the way down, and so that it achieves the sufficient depth, still be intact, and then detonate it and achieve the weapons effects. That's what the MOP is for. But to release the MOP, it also needs to be at an altitude and at an airspeed that allows it to achieve its desired penetration angle and speed. And that's only done with the high altitude delivery from an appropriate aircraft, like you said, B-2, B-52.
And I'll point out that we posed this question on our webinar yesterday to General Amick and Norkin, the former commander of the Israeli Air Force, and he said it's not a possibility for Israel to be dropping the MOP or flying B-2s or B-52s at this point. It has what it has. Admiral Donegan, a question to you from General Chuck Wald. Can you discuss what Israel and the U.S. will need to do about Iranian threats to naval assets in the Gulf to protect our U.S.-based assets in the region and our allies' assets as well?
Yeah, I think the U.S. has done what we needed to do to protect our assets, and that's assemble forces in the region that set up the highest level of possible deterrence. So you have, number one, the very direct communication from the United States, that we're not involved in this, don't attack U.S. forces. And then you have the posturing of forces to back that up. And it's now 2 carrier strike groups that are now in the region or towards it or close enough anyway. And then you have the posturing of other forces in the region, as was discussed earlier by the generals. I think those 2 elements are key. And the reason that they are, because it goes along the lines of what I said before. If then our forces are attacked, then you will see the U.S. get involved the response would be to eliminate, operate though in the environment and sanctuary that the Israelis have created, to do it with much greater freedom than they would have been able to do in the past because of the elimination of a significant portions and corridors of the air defense system over Iran. So that is the key to this, is the prevention and deterrence side, as opposed to how we would react afterwards and protect. And then we could talk at length too about options that the Iranians have mentioned. You've heard a few snippets of potentially closing the Straits of Hormuz. In my opinion, things like that, where you now start to jeopardize energy across this globally, you're going to have a similar reaction from the U.S. and others to that not being a positive thing, and an escalation that wouldn't be in favor of the Iranians now.
Thank you, Admiral. Final question, and I apologize if we didn't get to all of them. Maybe General Moore, you could weigh in on this one. Sticking with global oil supply, would there be value to hitting Karg Island, Iran's main export terminal of crude to Iran? Would that be a valuable target for Israel or the United States to hit, to pressure the regime?
Yeah, I think all these infrastructure targets, Karg is very important. That's where they offload all of their oil to go out for international sales, or their refinement capabilities in several different locations of the country are very, very important to the regime, and for the regime to remain in power. That's where they're getting all of their income. I don't see any reason why you would do that now. Obviously, those are the types of targets that we hold at risk should the regime decide they want to come after U.S. servicemen and women or any of our basing and infrastructure in the region. I have no doubt there's been private communications that have been going on with the Iranian government about what will happen if they do decide to do that. And I think it's targets like Karg Island and those refining areas or operations that they understand that they would lose should they decide to take those types of actions.
All right. Well, General Moore, General Guastella, Admiral Donegan, thank you so much for your time and insights this afternoon. To our audience, thanks so much for tuning in. You can find all our latest updates and analysis of this momentous conflict as it's unfolding on our website, jinsa.org. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Blaze. Thanks, Jimsa.